If I had to rank Communist Party USA leaders, it's actually not much of a contest.
Why? For first or last? Or for second, which is always an interesting position.
Oh, that's tough.
I feel like if instead of asking people who's number one,
who would
you
you number
ask them,
two?
You should ask them number two because I think it gives you more insight into their thinking.
True, because there's always like LeBron, for instance, right?
I don't believe
Like
he's
LeBron
a member of the Communist Party.
No, I know, but we're talking. But if he was, he'd be number one. He excels. But in basketball, for instance, and I feel like this is pertinent considering what we're doing tonight. We're fucking hooping.
Because Brace likes to practice his dunking.
I like as I age into being an even older Jewish person, I have to get into playing basketball.
I don't think you should. I'm just.
You don't think that I can dunk? You've seen me dunk.
Here's what I want to say. I like your knees, and I think you should keep them.
Me too. I think I should keep them fully extended as I go into. I want to say this right now. Grokpedia, if you're listening, Wikipedia is done.
This is for the AI transcript of this podcast that comes in whatever future, and then will be used to populate all information about you on the internet.
Absolutely. Yes. Liz, and we're not joking now. We're being serious completely. You've seen me dunk before, correct? Mm-hmm. You have to say yes.
Yes.
You've seen me dunk many times, yes?
Yes.
Oh, so you're trying to make it. Well, now it's maybe it'll be.
It can't read. It can't. It doesn't understand my tone.
It doesn't. Neither do I sometimes, frankly. And if I've dunked so consistently in the time that you've known me, then I think it's a fair thing to say that I can dunk.
Brace Belden can dunk.
That's good. You know what? I can dunk. And I can say hello.
Hello, I'm Liz.
My name is Brace.
And I'm producer Young Chomsky.
And this is TrueAnon. Hello.
Hello.
There was a lot more I wanted to get to from this book.
I
but
know.
It wasn't, you don't want to take people down too many paths.
There's a lot that we didn't cover of the book in this interview. And yet I still think the interview was quite good.
I think so too.
I really love talking to Aaron.
Me too.
I feel so cozy. I feel like I wish we had a little fireplace in our studio. We could just like curl up, a little blanket and a little pillow, and just be like, Aaron, talk to us about the stories.
Instead, I mean, you guys obviously can't see it.
We're sitting very upright.
We're not only upright. My chair is on its last legs. No pun at all, because it really is.
Well, we got to make.
But also, we have the AC on full blast, November style. Shirts off. Obviously, Liz in a muumuu. Myself in a sort of a caftan.
And yet we're matching.
And yet we're matching. And yet you're matching.
Because we're always matching. It's sort of a bananas and pajamas situation.
Well, when I walk through these studio doors, I take off the pants and I put on the sarong. And that's how we get in the mood here. We all sort of put on our foreign accoutrements and clothes, and then we get down and talk business. What's the business we're talking today, Liz?
The Communist Party of the United States.
Of America.
I said of the United States. Oh, of America.
Because maybe there's some other United States somewhere else we haven't heard about yet,
United States of Africa.
Exactly. Well, they don't even fucking say that, dude. They'll kill you for that one.
No, and the AI is going to put that in there, and it's going to be a whole thing.
Yeah. Oh, my God. But one day there will be.
Yeah.
One day there will be, Hillary. We are talking to Aaron Leonard.
Fan favorite,
and who have been on the show. Let me say that in a way that is not me eating every word there. Who we've not had on the show for a while, but I'm glad we're having on again.
Yes.
And we're talking about the long war against American communism. Let's run the interview. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. We have with us here in the studio, fully above ground, fully legal, Aaron Leonard, author and historian living in California, author of 6 books about government repression and the left in America, and a couple of those, am I crazy, 1 or 2 of those about folk music?
Yeah,
also.
folk music and music of the 60s.
Yes. And here to talk about his new book, Menace of Our Time, The Long War Against American Communism, which Gerald Horne, I have to add this in, Gerald Horne called comprehensive and sprightly.
Sprightly.
I know. Well, he's got away with words.
It was very kind of him to say that, I must say. I'm not being ironic. I appreciate it.
Welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be back. It's great to be in, I guess this is the People's Republic of Brooklyn.
It's so nice to have you here, not on Zoom.
Oh, it
and
is.
to do it in person.
Yeah, ditto to that.
Yeah. So the book, well, what would you say, without reading the back of the book, although, you know what? Because this is the back of the book with what it actually explains what the book is about. Sometimes they just put the little blurbs on there. I don't love that. What is the book about?
It's the history of the repression of the Communist Party USA, which was, the party that represented communism in the United States. I mean, it's, without getting too defensive out the gate, I mean, I have issues with the Communist Party USA. I kind of write in the introduction because I did come out of a Maoist background. I'm a lapsed Maoist. I've since moved on from that. They don't let me into their temples anymore. But, we Maoists, we were so much better than the Communist Party USA. They were old. They were stodgy. They liked the American flag. They were hierarchical. They were like a little devious and sneaky. On the other hand, they thought we were young whippersnappers who didn't know the seriousness of what we were talking about when we were talking about revolution.
Classic.
We were both right.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it would have been nicer if one of us wasn't, so, off track, but, there it is. However, look, the 20th century is really, it's the story of the battle between capitalism and this nominal communism. I mean, it kind of frames the whole thing. I mean, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, it seems like a lot of the historiography has tried to move on, but I can't really understand, and I don't think it's proper to understand the 20th century without understanding this battle for communism. And you have this U.S. party, which starts in the wake of the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. It's got its roots in the Socialist Party, which sprang up in the late 19th century. Which that's probably another book to write, which I don't think that's my job. But 1917, Lenin kind of comes out of nowhere, seizes power, and just upends the world order, and the left socialists gravitate toward this communism. But I wrote this book, The Folk Singers in the Bureau, about people such as Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger, Alan Lomax, Bess Lomax, about how they were partisans of the Communist Party USA in the 40s and early 50s, and how as a result the FBI in particular was all in their business. To do that, I actually ended up having to try to understand the Communist Party USA, and I was just fascinated at the level of repression brought against them. And this was in the period of what's popularly known as the McCarthy era, which I think, and other historians agree, maybe in different terminology, that's actually a wrong way to describe the era of the Second Red Scare. I mean, Joe McCarthy shows up on the scene 1950, and by 1954, I believe, he's being censured. Well, the drive against communism starts, the particular drive of the Second Red Scare starts in the aftermath of World War II when Truman declares the Truman Doctrine. I'm going to give money to fight communism in Greece in the Greek Civil War, and I'm going to give money to Turkey. We're not letting Stalin take any more of what he's taken. I mean, Trump the other day said the U.S. won World War II. Well, I think two people won World War II, the Soviets and the U.S.
Yeah.
And that actually kind of determined the world.
And there was a lot more cost on one side.
Good point. I mean, what was it, like 20 million people in the Soviet Union died? And if you read what the German and Nazis did to the Slavs, it's just horrific. I mean, it's a story that needs more attention than it's gotten. So I write this book about the folk singers in the Bureau, and I get very curious about the second Red Scare, and I'm discovering, there was something in 1939, 1941, which some historians have called the mini Red Scare. I'm like, that's interesting. And then there's the first Red Scare, which I'll talk about in a second. And then there's the COINTELPRO era, which is not a Red Scare, but it's a period where the COINTELPRO is this program the FBI started in 1956. It stands for Counterintelligence Program. And it's not just in a drive to collect intelligence. It's a drive to disrupt organizations.
Yeah, something I actually learned from this book that I didn't realize before is I think COINTELPRO is heavily associated with the disruptions towards like the Black Panthers and other New Left groups, which was involved in COINTELPRO and also like MH Chaos, for instance. But the majority of COINTELPRO operations were against the Communist Party USA, which at that time, or at least during part of the time of COINTELPRO, was probably smaller than most New Left groups. I mean, there's dwindling numbers, post like 54, 55, 56. But still, they were really focused on them.
Yeah, I think it comes out statistically about 60% of the COINTELPRO cases are leveled against the Communist Party USA, so from the standpoint of my research, it's like, if you're not telling that story, you're not really telling the story of COINTELPRO. And I got to give props to the L.A. Public Library, because if you go to the FBI's website and put in COINTELPRO, the Black Panther COINTELPRO shows up, the New Left shows up, I believe White Hate shows up. Communist Party USA COINTELPRO doesn't show up. But there's something called Archives Unbound, so your listeners can go to this. I think probably New York Public Library might have it too. It's Gale's Archive Unbound. Yeah. They have the full corpus of the COINTELPRO there. They also have Benjamin Davis file, which Gerald Horne, who
he wrote a book about it.
Generously blurbed my book and wrote a wonderful biography of Ben Davis. Horne actually obtained Davis's FBI file, which is enormous. I don't know, something on a level of 20,000 pages.
Jesus.
I mean, I looked through as much of it as I could, and I think he did as deep a dive as he could. But there's the transcription of the wiretaps of him, that's going on because he's a leader. He's an African-American city councilman from Harlem circa, 1948, 49. So he's like a high priority target. Point being is, COINTELPRO, people think they know about COINTELPRO. I thought I knew about COINTELPRO. Turns out I didn't, and the interesting thing about COINTELPRO, and I'm kind of poking into the book in various ways, but I guess it's okay.
We're nonlinear here. It's good.
Yeah, that's good.
Rhizomatic.
The name COINTELPRO always kind of confuses me because I think militarily the doctrine of COINTELPRO is you are trying to undermine foreign intelligence. And then there's an aspect of maybe domestic subversion. But I think more popularly it's foreign intelligence. So why that name? Well, it turns out, so Khrushchev stands up in 1956 and denounces Stalin, which, I mean, the analogy I make, it's akin to the Pope getting up and saying, well, I'm not so sure about this Jesus thing.
Yeah.
It just sends an earthquake through this global communist movement. The FBI is watching this, and they're like, oh, well, here's an opportunity. These, Khrushchev did to the Communist Party what all this other repression could only have imagined in terms of kind of cutting the legs out from underneath.
I think that and the incident in Hungary kind of coming in like a 1-2, which people say was a Stalin thing, but no, it was Khrushchev that did it. It was during Khrushchev. Stalin was dead. Those were dealt a near fatal blow to basically I guess not like Western European, but like the British Communist Party did not do well after that, and the Communist Party USA was just decimated.
Yeah, they survived the Second Red Scare. Their top leaders were systematically sent to prison. They went from perhaps 80,000 people down to about 20,000, which 20,000, in the U.S., that's not nothing. But after Khrushchev did his shtick, they went down to several thousand, if that. And that's kind of where they stayed. But back to the point of counterintelligence is my sense that the FBI and the larger U.S. ruling apparatus began to look at the Communist Party not so much as this domestic force that's going to challenge us, even if it's maybe a kind of a fantastic notion. They started to look at it as like, this is mainly an agent of a foreign power, and we're going to target it as such. And that's why the COINTELPRO moniker makes sense. But they also saw that, with the diminishment of their power, we can actually attack them from within. Of course, they had an informant, moving up into the highest ranks, but I'll talk about that at another point. So, the book is, I just kind of followed my curiosity, but began to think, you got two major Red Scares, and I need to talk about the Palmer raids, but you've got two major Red Scare, a mini Red Scare, the COINTELPRO era. It's really kind of like a whole thing. It's like there's never been a time when this group hasn't been subject to pretty intense repression. I mean, yes, there are degrees. It wasn't like it was, to use the popular, turned up to 11 all the time. But it never relented. And even when in the 30s, during the Popular Front era, when the communists were attempting to play nice with Roosevelt, even then there was significant things happening against them, repression-wise.
Yeah, I think, it's cute because you start the book out talking of, like you mentioned, how you've never been kind of a big fan of CPUSA just from your own political background. And maybe that was, maybe now you say it's a little mistaken. But you say that during the course of writing and researching this book, that your perception of the party changed, that, you kind of came into a new understanding. I feel like our listeners are all probably have various opinions about CPUSA. I think we all do, either from what they've read, from, the waves of the Red Scares, or from their limited, I'm assuming limited interaction with the current CPUSA and their kind of presence. But I'm curious as to kind of if you can say what about this research shifted your kind of perception of the party?
No, that's an excellent question, observation. I was talking with my colleague Connor Gallagher, who co-authored my first two books. Him and I talk often, try to bounce around ideas. And I asked him, I said, look, well, historically, was the Communist Party USA a good thing or not? And I think the answer is, they were. Yeah. I mean, come on. Yeah. I mean, who was fighting against lynching in the 30s? Yeah. Who was fighting for unions? Who was fighting for unemployment? Who was moving people's furniture back into their apartments, when they were evicted? I mean, and they attracted the best and the bravest. No, not all of them, but they attracted among the best and bravest, society, humanity in this country at that point had. These were people who were willing to stick their neck out and, cast aside their privilege toward, a greater morality and a higher calling. And, they do need to be acknowledged for that. That doesn't negate all the problematics that exist. I mean, the problem is, as you get older, things are complicated. Yeah,
I mean, I think with the CPUSA too, I think it has a sort of interesting, the genesis of the CPUSA, which you mentioned, is like essentially a split off the Socialist Party. And the Socialist Party was in large part, from my understanding, yes, it was like the Socialist Party, but a huge part of it was like these like language-based groups that made up part of it. I don't even know how to describe that, but like, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, but like a Finnish language Socialist Party like groups would have sort of their own factions within it, and things like this. And I think one of the big differences between the CPUSA and before that the Socialist Party USA and like their European counterparts or their counterparts elsewhere, but mostly in Europe, is that there wasn't this tradition of they didn't have the same exact struggles that they would have had in like Germany or in France, where like the labor movement here, a lot of the Communist Party like early. So the big personalities associated with it came out of syndicalism, which isn't always the case for European parties. I mean, it is and it isn't. But like in Germany, for instance, like they were sort of a little further down the line when they started the Communist Party, when the Socialist Party split off. I mean, obviously, all of these groups are rooted in the labor movement. But in the U.S., I mean, one of the big tendencies here was like the IWW and this sort of what would later be called criminal syndicalism. But that was really a lot of times like very revolutionary. And then you had people like the right wing of the Socialist Party, which were a little more sort of akin to like the Labor Party or like the Social Democratic Party of Germany or the right wing of that. I think one of the interesting things about the history of the Communist Party of the USA, but also in Canada and in Mexico too, I kind of find this interesting, although for different reasons, is that they just had significantly less success than basically anywhere else in the world. And the Communist Party USA, I would say now, and for I guess for all of recent history, has been known not for its successes in terms of like getting laws passed and maybe for the Scottsboro Board stuff or like for the unemployment councils, but mainly in terms of the repression, right? So like the most famous things about the Communist Party USA are essentially the outline of the Communist Party USA, and the both Red Scares, and then the Hollywood blacklist and the McCarthy stuff. And so it's interesting. I think in popular conception. And in truth, in many ways, like the Communist Party USA really were just guys who got arrested a lot.
Provocative point there, Brace.
Or spied.
Yeah, well, boy, one thing is they came about in the United States, because as you're speaking, you're making me realize, we're in the United States at a particular moment. My sense is we've got an elevated decline going on.
Yeah.
I mean, whether or not this gets reversed, I mean, I can't see into the future, but there's nothing going on over the course, probably since Obama, that indicates to anything other than the U.S. as this great power coming out of World War II is becoming a great deal less. And that's actually kind of the major story. One of the revelations in writing this was what was the material basis for this Communist Party in this country. And it was like you had industry.
Yeah.
It was vital. And, it was like bread and butter. The 1919 steel strike is where William Z. Foster, the party leader, came out of. And, some of the Wobblies actually, I believe Big Bill Haywood migrated into the party and stuff. But you had all that whole industrial base. We've been in this, nominal post-industrial society since, manufacturing, socialized production has been in decline since the 80s. I mean, there's still
before that, really.
Yeah, starting in 1960, you're right. Yeah. Which is kind of presented, profound challenges for activists, wanting to conceive of a better world. But there was a materiality and a material basis for this thing to spring up. But they sprang up, kind of to your question of why was it they were never as big a deal as in other countries, in a country that was on the rise, that was going to become a global super. I want to read something that was become the preeminent global superpower. I want to read the opening of my book because I think this goes to it. The fireworks display at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo on September 5, 1901 was a sight to behold. A highlight of the pyrotechnics was a display that spelled out the message, "Welcome, President McKinley, Chief of our nation and our empire," an homage to the Commander-in-Chief of the United States who had arrived to speak at the event, and the recent colonial acquisition of the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Hawaii, and Guam during the Spanish-American War. I was writing this, I think, before Trump came into office and started channeling McKinley, and I was kind of struck by kind of bookends. You know, McKinley comes in at the point where the U.S. is becoming this global empire. They go into World War I, achieve a lot of prestige internationally. They come out of World War II, and they're just this behemoth. And here you've got this person Trump. All these years later, let's do tariffs. Let's channel McKinley, and it's on the downside of things. It's the downbound train to use Bruce Springsteen. On a downbound train song, and Chuck Berry did a song called Downbound Train.
Doesn't surprise me.
It's about going down to the devil.
To dream that he rode on a downbound train.
I mean, it is interesting. So, you mentioned the Palmer raids before, and I think that people who know about the history of kind of radicalism in the United States will probably be familiar with this. For those who aren't, well, we'll get to it in a second. But you can't help but draw a few parallels between the Palmer raids and between really repression of left-wing beliefs in the early 20th century. And a lot of what you saw, especially in the summer months, but I guess we're probably going to continue to see with some of Trump's more political immigration targeting. I don't mean obviously all the immigration targeting is political, but targeting people, for instance, for being the woman who wrote a op-ed about I think it was starvation in Gaza, who was taken from out of her home, or Mahmoud Khalil. For people who are being investigated and possibly deported or put through deportation proceedings because of political beliefs. That's really how a lot of the American government's war against left-wing beliefs also started. I mean, you have in 1903 the Anarchist Exclusion Act, which also outlaws, I think, epileptics trying to get into the country. They just sort of added that one in too. Maybe they forgot it from a prior one. And then a lot of this culminates in there was sort of a wave of anarchist bombings, which I think have now been kind of mostly forgotten, but there were some pretty famous ones. And culminates in these huge raids and immigration raids, because most people, but a lot of people involved in left-wing politics were immigrants from various European countries mostly. And the government just sent agents after everyone they could and would just deport you. And they sort of were fairly successful in many cases in breaking up left-wing groups, because they saw that the base here was immigrants.
Even before the Palmer raid. So after McKinley gets killed, there's this, because the guy who shoots McKinley is this steel worker named Salgas, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I mean,
God knows how to. It's one of those.
Yeah.
A lot of C's and Z's in it.
Apologies for that, but
you should be.
What actually was interesting is, so the guy is, 1901. It's 1901. And the guy is in the greeting line for McKinley, and he's got a weapon, or a pistol wrapped up in a handkerchief. He shoots McKinley in the chest. McKinley holds on for 8 days, and there is suddenly a whole hue and cry against anarchism. New York State passes this criminal anarchy law, making it a felony to advocate in print, the desirability of revolution. But what's remarkable is, let's see, okay, let me read from the book, because in Camden, New Jersey, a man named Ethelbert Stone was arrested while McKinley still clung to life on the charge of aiding and abetting the attempted assassination. His crime? He had remarked that he would not be surprised if McKinley was killed. I mean, this kind of reminds me of the storm after Charlie Kirk was
I was just going to say,
killed,
there's, some conspiracy theories about
where
this.
It was
very event.
you really just needed to not say anything because it was going to be misconstrued.
Oh, wait, Liz, are you talking about conspiracy theories of the McKinley shooting?
and Kirk. I mean, there's like some interesting parallels
It
there.
is like, from what I know, it was like people were like, well, he's like a police agent that did it to like, that was sort of the conspiracy theory at the time, was that he wasn't really an anarchist. He was like a law. Listen, and forgive me if you're Czech or Polish or whatever the fuck that is. There's a lot of Z's in that. We don't have that kind of lettering here. It's true, and don't pretend like you know how to pronounce it.
But I'm just saying that it's funny, when we're talking about these kind of bookends and the Trump admin always reaching back into the McKinley administration and later and kind of after McKinley for both policy, but also they're using a lot of legal precedent as well. That was kind of established then, what we're kind of talking about now, that, these sort of like these big triggering events in both administrations have various conspiracy theories all around them, is all I'm saying.
I think where I would go with that is this Paul Simon line from his play, which I forget the title, but the newspapers and the TV, they'd kill you if they could. The Cape Man.
The newspapers and the TV crews, well, they'd kill you if they could.
It's a really great album. Very underappreciated. But the newspapers and the TV, they'd kill you if they could. So McKinley gets assassinated. An anarchist is implicated. Anybody even whispering, the A word is implicated. Another case. Another man, Pella Condimenico, was arrested after stabbing a man named John Alfonso in the throat. The two men had fought after accusing each other of being anarchists. Neither were. It's the old McTavish is dead and his brother don't know it. His brother is dead and McTavish don't know it. They're both dead in the very same bed, and neither one knows the other's dead.
There's something that you mentioned there, which is that even the state law that New York State passes, whatever, you can't advocate for revolution or even ideas about revolution in print. A lot of this stuff pretty quickly came up against the Supreme Court. Like there was a British anarchist that was deported. I think his name was like John. It's like a British name. His name was like John. But he gets deported in, I believe, 1903 after the Anarchist Exclusion Act is passed, and he takes it to the Supreme Court, and they're like, nah, that doesn't apply to you. Like, the First Amendment does not apply to people who like come here. You're not a citizen, and you're advocating for the overthrow of the government. And this is something that we see a lot during, kind of up until a certain point, is just like these really kind of draconian and unconstitutional laws are passed, or programs are assembled by the FBI or whatever, in order to stamp out what they thought of as the enemy here. I want to fast forward a little bit to the essentially the founding of the Communist Party, because the Communist Party was not which, by the way, had one of the worst names for a party, I think, until it became Communist Party USA in like the late 20s. It was like Communist Workers Party. Mm-hmm. Well, there were two.
Workers
Communist Party, yes. Which I guess,
as opposed to what was the Monty Python thing and the
Your Day and People's Fry.
Yeah. I know, it's fair because there was two and they basically had identical names. But you mentioned in the book that like the Communist Party was essentially founded in secret, and not so uncommon for communist parties all across the world. But it was founded in secret and was like essentially like kind of criminalized or quasi-criminalized for like the first 10 years.
Yeah, there's an awful lot to unpack there. First, fun fact. When they finally did unite these two different parties into one place, guess what town it was in?
What?
Woodstock, New York.
There's no. Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah,
it was on the outskirts, but Woodstock is. Who would have thought?
Yeah. Well, in a big field outside of Woodstock.
So a lot of things. Well, first off, we kind of stepped past the Palmer raids.
Yeah,
because it's complicated. I think Joseph Heller has this line, it might be in Catch-22, and I can't remember it exactly, but it's like, the law is whatever you can get away with.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what we're seeing contemporarily. And we're also seeing the pushback, which is heartening. The old left-wing trope, where there is repression, there will be resistance, is still true. But the Palmer raids happen, and maybe this will help kind of open this up, is so the anarchists plant a bomb outside the Attorney General's office in Washington, D.C. FDR actually lives across the street. Palmer is on his way up to bed, so he survives. But the windows are blown out. It was a funny thing. You read the New York Times, and they quote FDR saying, "Well, I don't think the anarchist was wealthy because of his socks." I mean, there was remnants of a human being, and that's what, you just see the patrician, sensibility, coming through with FDR. But the Palmer raids happen, and you have this Lusk Commission in New York State, because New York is like the most powerful state in the Union, which they go and they round up a bunch of communists. And then J. Edgar Hoover, who is an upper-comer in the Bureau of Investigation, he rounds up a bunch of people, and he says, these are perfect cases, uses the exact same language as somebody else has used recently, but they round up thousands of people. They send 400 of them, I think about 400, on a ship, and they deport them out, including Emma Goldman. The several thousand others, I'm probably conflating the numbers, are not deported because things change. People in authority start to question, we've got this Constitution, the United States is singular in certain freedoms. There's pushback, and these folks are eventually released and stuff. But for a while, they're not. But this is the flames that the United Communist Party is born in, and they initially work underground. And they are these foreign clubs, a Russian club, Lithuanian club, Estonian, Finnish, and they've got their own communities and hierarchies and things of that sort. I mean, later the party will become, for lack of a better term, Americanized and stuff. But they initially work as an underground entity. Lenin says, knock it off. You guys, you can publish literature. You can do stuff. Don't be underground, which I thought was like really interesting, because during the Second Red Scare, the Communist Party again goes underground because they say, fascism is coming, German-style Hitler fascism is coming, and it hurt them. I mean, I can see where the decision came from. It was not capricious, or it was not fantastic. Mm-hmm. You just look around in the world today, things, people use the term scary, which I try to avoid because be angry, Uh-huh. But anyway, fear is a real thing. I acknowledge that. But going underground means immediate. Well, actually, I'm working on this book now about SDS, and encounter the Weathermen, who were this quasi-terrorist group, and they went underground, and that was kind of it for them.
Yeah.
As far as like a force of any kind of influence and things like that. So it's real, to use the term, problematic. The party is birthed underground. And after several years, they do come above ground.
You said something that I just want to kind of go back to just real briefly, which is that you talked about Hoover, who is this kind of up-and-coming figure at this moment. And I do think it's worth pointing out that both Hoover and the Bureau were sort of coming into their own alongside the Communist Party also being formed and coming into their own. And these two then institutions, and this is much of your book, are in a kind of dance with each other and also form much of the Bureau's reason for existence, basically, in those early years, and especially all of Hoover's successes and his own professional advancement that he was looking for, his careerism, really gets tied up in going after this one entity, it seems like. And so it's hard to kind of even talk about his career or the Bureau without talking about the Communist Party, and yet we very much do. And the FBI is its own sort of thing with its own sort of history, but these two bodies are intimately intertwined.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking, boy, wouldn't that be a good Netflix series? I could see a good 4 or 5 seasons.
Yeah.
Well, there's plenty of material.
Actually, Karl Marx wrote this essay on crime. I don't think it's I don't think I fully agree with all the points in the essay, but he does make the point. It's like, without the criminal justice system, they got diddly.
That's true.
So the two things are dialectically related.
And they both create each other.
Yeah, but it's not in a loop. It's
Right.
developmental.
Right.
I think Hoover. Well, interesting about Hoover is I believe he gets his start in the Library of Congress. He is a real capable bureaucrat in the kind of the neutral meaning of the term, and he develops this filing system where he says, give me 5 minutes and I can retrieve records, based on this. I mean, you could imagine what Hoover could do today with AI.
Oh, my God.
I mean, it's an awesome and terrible prospect, but he modernized the Bureau, and he carried that forward. The other thing is you see that he's got decades of experience, so when it comes to the tumult of the 60s, he's not just pulling it out of his hat. Now, he is doddering, and he's confronted with a situation that's totally unique and stuff. But as I've dug into this more, it's like just making fun of Hoover and dismissing him is, okay, fine, ridicule is fine. But, who is it? Lao Tzu, know your enemy, know yourself. You can win 1,000 battles and never face defeat. It's worth understanding who these folks are. The FBI, a lot of the higher ups are very professional. They're very good at what they do.
Sure.
They're devious and they're responsible for a lot of very bad things. But it's worth understanding that they are the front line of protecting the status quo.
Yeah.
And, if you want something other than the status quo, you got to confront that reality.
I want to make clear sort of a certain periodization for our listeners. The Communist Party kind of went through the different sort of phases of it, kind of up until the end of World War II, where you stop getting into like periods and it kind of just becomes what it is. But the Communist Party USA and the communist movement overall, from its inception, really was guided by an international strategy that was like people tried to apply in different ways in different countries, some more successfully than others, through the Communist International, which was a real thing that I think cannot be like overlooked or even it just has to be mentioned, which was a Soviet Union based international. There have been several internationals before this. Anybody who's familiar, obviously Karl Marx said First International, blah 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 blah. At the time that the Communist International was formed, I think there was 3 internationals. There was the Second International, 2.5 International, and then the Communist International, the Third International.
And there's the fourth.
And well, that was later. And there's about 54th Internationals. But
So that's 20.
that's about 20 internationals. Now there's no internationals. Although actually
200,
No, they try to keep
200,
doing
yeah.
that.
no, there still is the Socialist International.
Yeah.
There still is the Socialist International,
Now
which
they
has
just have conferences, unfortunately.
yes, and then there's also, I believe, there's whatever international the Democratic Party is a part of, but I can't remember what it's called, but it exists.
Davos.
The first period was kind of part of like the Bolshevikization of a lot of parties, not just in the U.S., but like across the world, where you had these parties that like broadly were aligned with Lenin, or like the Zimmerwald left or whatever. They were left wing, often, mostly, in fact, probably always opposed to World War I. But they had different beliefs and they had different structures, and then sort of Lenin kind of came up with this way to formalize that. And in the U.S., that sort of took a while. It took about 10 years, especially because they were underground, and there was 2 different ones. And then you had the second period, which is like sort of, I guess from like 1922 on, which was like them essentially trying to poach workers from other or like the base of other socialist parties. And there was a series of failed revolutions in Europe, or short-lived, or just dead in the cradle revolutions in Europe, and sort of a consolidation of what Marxism-Leninism meant, or what Leninism meant, because Marxism-Leninism, I guess, came across a little later. And then third period, where they sort of veer off and declare war on everybody. Unfortunately, that fails very miserably. And then in 34, 35, they're like, actually, remember, we're friends with everybody. And then, as you described earlier, when the Communist Party USA makes nice with Roosevelt, communist parties across the world do that and sort of make nice with everybody. They enter the government in some places. In Spain, they fight on the side of the Republic in the Civil War. In France, they enter the government, oftentimes unsuccessfully. And then throughout World War II, which starts in different places in different times, they support the war effort because the Soviet Union, although not at first, which also does them great damage in many places. But once the Soviet Union is attacked by Nazi Germany, they support the war effort and try to get everyone to go fight the Nazis. And I think broadly, that is kind of pre-World War II, pre-Red Scare in America communism. Or pre-Second Red Scare communism. And it's interesting because, no matter kind of what their orientation is towards the government, or towards other parties or anything, the FBI is just like, we fucking need to kill these guys. But it's interesting because there's also these really massive wars within the Communist Party itself during this time. And Jay Lovestone, who later is a lot of guys around Jay Lovestone have a kind of similar history, but was, I believe, a Socialist Party USA member, then a leader of the Communist Party USA, and then expelled in the 1920s, and then a Trotskyist, and then a CIA asset. I guess technically not an agent, but he is actually expelled for American exceptionalism, which is a term that I believe Stalin coined while expelling Jay Lovestone from the Communist Party USA. And it's funny, though, because his thesis was that, America has this really advanced economy. It's kind of not like Europe. And I'm not defending Jay Lovestone here, but he wasn't wrong in some ways. And it's interesting because you have this, and you mentioned this in the book, you have this these wars within the Communist Party, and then you have this war against this war waged on them by the FBI, because they're not really effective at waging their own war against the FBI. And the FBI really ably exploits, in Jay Lovestone's case, the CIA exploits these divisions within the Communist Party.
So I did when I wrote the book, I deliberately did not go into the internal politics, too far into the internal politics of the CPUSA. There are volumes and volumes, and people are still trying to understand it. And, I've read some of it. It's fascinating stuff. I mean, the internal politics of these, having, worked with the RCP for many years, become keenly aware of the drive to get it to correct line. And I'm still trying to process what good was it all. I mean, there's obviously having an ideological compass, is of some importance, having morals and, all that. But then there's just this internecine sectarianism, tearing yourself apart. It's all very problematic. I wanted to step back a little because you just covered a huge swath of stuff. One thing is, so yesterday was Armistice Day, the end of World War I. And one thing that doesn't get mentioned a lot, what a disaster for capitalism that was.
Yeah.
It's like Germany Germany didn't almost, but the rise of Hitler is rooted in how that war ended. There's an attempt at revolution by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. They're assassinated by these free corps, which are a lot of World War I vets who will, end up, many of them become stormtroopers. And this goes back to the periodization. So the periodization is, I think your assessment was on point, but this first period is, look, revolution is coursing around the globe. What Marx foresaw is happening. There's reason to believe this is true. Russia becomes the Soviet Union. I believe there's a revolution in Hungary.
Bela Lugosi's in the government.
Not Bela Lugosi.
Yeah, it was Bela Lugosi.
Bela Kuhn.
No. I know who Bela Kuhn is.
Okay.
Bela Lugosi was also part of that revolution.
Well,
I don't know. He wasn't in the government. I think he was in some.
I thought you were being funny.
No, I'm not being funny. No.
Well, it is kind of funny.
And Bela Lugosi, what a what a face on that. Bela Kun, not
And
Bela
the
Lugosi.
best
both of them.
Well, they
Dracula
both
in
had
all
faces.
of cinema, too.
Yeah, well, I'm saying, but I think both Bela Lugosi and Bela Kun.
Yeah, I think you're
both
right. Yeah,
interesting looking guys.
You know who could play a good Bela Kun?
Bela Lugosi, but no one else could do it. But yeah, he had to. That's why he became our Dracula, is because he had to leave after the revolution in Hungary.
See, now this is fascinating stuff.
Now that would be a good movie.
I know Bela
Getting the
Lugosi.
call.
Yeah,
Sad Bela Lugosi.
So many Bellas.
so many Bellas.
Too many Bellas.
Wasn't it Beauty and the Beast? Was there a Bella?
Bella,
Belle.
yeah, but surely
No A.
the Beast would have been Hungarian and
I think
Beauty
it is. I think it's all kind of, well, a lot of fairy tales are, Hungarian coded.
Yeah. But anyway, sorry. So everyone's doing these. And in Italy, there's all this sort of revolutionary upsurge.
Right. So the world is being, to use the cliche, it's being turned upside down. This is the first period.
Yes.
Lenin is like, can't stop, won't stop. Revolution.
Famous
Yeah.
quote from him.
Yeah, just keeps going. But that gives way to the second period, which is we need to consolidate. Things are a little chill. The new economic policy happens in the Soviet Union. But then, that doesn't last, and they usher in the third period, which is steeped in this Marxist or political economic theorem of the general crisis of capitalism.
Yes.
Capitalism is just going to collapse. You got to be careful with that. Like Lenin writes this book,
Yeah.
Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. It's like, how do you know that? It's like imperialism has to go away before you can say that. I mean, are we in late stage capitalism?
I don't like it when people say that, because I'm like, no, there can be way later stages than this.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice, but,
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing is to not get, whatever, historically determinist about such things. But the third period is bad, because this is the communists telling everybody, we are on the cusp of revolution. I think it gets expressed worst in Germany, Weimar Germany, where the party is like, the Social Democrats are fascists. And they were bad. The Social Democrats did attack the communists.
I was about to say, people give, and I just want to give a little bit of a defense here for the Communist Party of Germany. And I also want to correct myself, because I've always said that famous quote that people sort of use to denigrate the Communist Party of Germany, after Hitler, our turn, which I've always said, well, it's technically true in half the country at least. That quote I found out was actually by a social democratic politician. It was not from the Communist Party of Germany. But people always talk like those the three arrows, which you often see in like sort of Antifa stuff, right? Those arrows, one was against monarchism, one was against Nazism, and the other was against communism.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the social democratic orientation towards the communists. And also a lot of the social democrats in Germany, they were in bed with the fat cats. But it's clear. Listen, hindsight 2020. Clear there were some mistakes made on both sides there, but people really blame the Communist Party of Germany and Talman and all these guys for giving us Hitler. But I'm like, you know what? I'm pretty sure it was the Social Democrats who voted for the Enabling
They
Act.
betrayed, yeah.
They betrayed.
Well, my sense is there's a whole package, but as you're saying that, I'm thinking like, Stephen Miller, there's Stephen Miller and there's Kamala Harris, right? I mean, and this came up around, well, I don't want to get in too deep, but over the matter of Gaza. There is a difference in how these people approach things. What the Biden administration supported, in Gaza when it was going on was reprehensible. He enabled the whole thing. But it could be worse. And that's what I think Hitler showed. There is a distinction between these very powerful people at the pillars of these governmental administrations. So, and I'm trying to make an analogy, and maybe I don't know how well it holds up, but
I will say the KPD. I think you are correct in assessing that they basically alienated themselves from everybody. Like not just the KPD, but like communist parties throughout Europe really lost a lot of friends and maybe lost a lot of support from like workers that did. All the social democratic parties in Europe had huge amounts of worker support that the communists were trying to get from them. And their tactic of trying to get that support by like this attack that they were doing just objectively didn't work. I mean, I'm not saying they are theoretically wrong, but it didn't work in practice.
Yeah, so the communists target the social democratic government as social fascists. At the same time, the Nazis are gaining steam, and the Nazis, I did this if people are curious, I have a website, myname.net, aaronleonard.net, that's Aaron Leonard.net.
We know it's 2 A's.
Yeah, well, you do, but try to go into Starbucks sometime and see what they come up with.
Fair enough.
I thank Kay and Peele, though, for getting that spelling correct. Anyway, I have an article there. It's an interview with the historian about the rise of fascism in Richard Evans. And he talks about, the tens of thousands of armed men who helped bring Hitler to power. And it was based on, not only the free corps, in the wake of World War I, but then the street fighting with the paramilitaries of the Communist Party, which, these people, really kind of sharpened their blades. And, this invariably did lead to the rise of Hitler, who was like 1/3. He had something akin to 1/3 of the electorate, and it was dwindling. But he seized power, and, I still kind of puzzle over this. It's like, the question is, well, what if there wasn't a Hitler, There probably still would have been something really bad in Germany, but there's nobody like Hitler, and I say that in the most derogatory way imaginable. This man was just awful, exponentially awful, and that actually plays a role in how history unfolds. But the communists lose, Hitler comes to power. The first thing he goes after is the communists. He puts Ernst Thälmann in Dachau, lets him wallow there for close to 10 years before executing him. But then he goes after the Social Democrats. And, nobody is like protesting. There isn't a mass. There's one or two sporadic efforts, but there isn't the kind of movement that's taking Hitler serious. I think I don't know if the communists felt like, their turn would come next. You are correct. Literally, it was a social democrat who coined that, rather, peace in our time kind of equivalent.
It's a tough one, yeah.
But then the whole period shifts. Second period, okay. Third period's over. Ding, ding, ding. Next class, Popular Front.
Yeah.
And then it's like, veering off the other way if we have to unite with everybody we can to, stop this emerging fascism. And, that brings us, into the period of the 1939 and the non-aggression pact with Germany. And, it's just one gosh darn thing after another.
To linger on sort of the Popular Front period for a second, this actually went pretty well for the communists in certain ways. But I think that it's interesting because both the third period and the Popular Front period really sort of presage a lot of the Communist Party's post-war, or actually, let me rephrase that, because it's almost like their post-war orientation through 45 until today, they sort of mix up all of the different periods and just deploy them occasionally. Like they'll go underground, like, the first period, but then they'll be like, they'll attack all these other sort of left-wing groups in sort of third period in like the 1960s, 1970s. And then they'll basically ally with the Democratic Party. And now they're sort of in an eternal one-sided Popular Front where the Democratic Party is like, we don't even know you guys, but they're like, we're voting for you. But it's interesting because there are these distinct periods, and then the political orientation of the periods after World War II just is really not as sharp. And I think in large part that's due to one of Stalin's worst ideas. And he had, and I say this as somebody, who was an objective observer. He had some bad ideas sometimes. Destroying the Communist International was one of that was like almost the death knell for any chance at really international revolution. International revolutions after that succeeded in spite of that. But it's interesting. In the U.S., they were really sort of attached themselves to Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt was she was a little more open-minded, I feel like, than...
Yeah, she was definitely more left than her husband.
Yeah, and she would
I get the
kick it
sense
with
they
people.
probably didn't get along that well.
Really? She seems so nice.
But I did discover FDR was pretty bad news.
Yeah.
I mean, I discovered this famous quote, like 1934. I mean, the Republicans were all in his business all the time. You're soft on the communists. And he's like, no, I'm not. We're actually doing something about these people. You have to undermine the soil that's engendering them. I mean, and, he famously... I think in 1939, 1940, he talks to a gathering of a youth conference, which included a huge component of the Young Communist League. And he basically tells them, look, I understand some of you are communists, and you have the ability to say that, but be careful. And then, within a year, they pass the Smith Act, which is essentially, if you're an immigrant and you're a communist, you're persona non grata. But then there's another stipulation which basically federalizes this New York concept. New York concept, 1902, criminal anarchy, you can't write about revolution. The Supreme Court upholds it, I think 20 years later, this guy Benjamin Gitlow, who had been a Communist Party leader. A lot of the Communist Party leaders, some of them didn't turn out too well. Gitlow ended up became a renegade.
Yeah.
But the Supreme Court issues a Gitlow decision, and people don't know this, saying, look, we don't have to sit around and wait for the spark to start a fire. We can stop this stuff now. Barney Fife, nip it in the bud.
Well, and not to be the most devil's advocate guy that's ever been born.
You aren't.
I'm not. No, but maybe I am. It is interesting because, and I, as somebody who is knowingly guilty of this, it's like, let's be completely honest. The Communist Party USA was trying to overthrow, or at least theoretically should have been trying. Whether they were actually trying is, up to it's a little subjective. But theoretically, they should have been trying to overthrow the government of the United States and replace it with a different form of government. And so it's like, and people always do this, and I do this too. It's an effective thing to do. I'm not saying you shouldn't do this, but it's like, you're always like, well, wait, why are you trying to take away my ability to overthrow you? And it's good to use the hypocrisy of liberalism against itself, you know what I mean? Because it can be effective and it can work. But the reality is when they say stuff like this, I'm like, I don't really have much of an argument. I'm like, yeah, the Communist Party USA, they would have locked your asses up.
Well, no, it's a good point. And
I would have supported them.
It's a true point, but there's another point. It's like, laws are laws. They were, to the degree they stayed within those bounds, there is a constitutional imperative that says you can say stuff. You can say whatever the heck you want.
Yeah.
You start moving on it, we've got laws for that too.
Yeah.
And this is where a distinction gets drawn. And I argue that the party throughout its history largely did stay within the laws. Now, they also didn't at periods too.
Yeah.
And it's true. I mean, yeah, when the 11 leaders were put on trial in Center Street in 1949, the Communist Manifesto was read into the transcript. Yeah, it's a revolutionary doctrine. But in 1969, there was this case against a Ku Klux Klan person in Ohio called Brandenburg versus the state of Ohio. Because the Klan, they have an agenda too, and it's pretty screwed up, violent agenda. But the court said you can say this. You can't do it.
That's a foundational case for free speech.
But for most of the 20th century, it was illegal. Yeah. And I think if you asked any school person, school boy or girl, well, could you... I mean, personally, back in the day, I'd be on the street corner screaming "Revolution, Revolution." Turn the clock back 20 years, I would be committing a felony.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like there's this throughout the book. One of the main enemies that the Communist Party USA has is the FBI, but then also it's this relationship with liberalism and like the liberalism of the U.S. government, which like waxes and wanes throughout the years, I guess. But like, I think one of the reasons that they weren't really able to get as much purchase. I mean, the main part, or not the main part, but the heyday of the CPUSA was in the 1930s, where they had like over 100,000 members, right? Well over 100,000 members, I think. And you know, these big rallies. They were a national force. But I think one of the things that stymied them throughout their history is not only repression from the government, but also the liberal outlook of of certain politicians and the Constitution, I guess, because and this is not going to come as a shock to anybody, but like Communist Party or communist movements have often thrived under really harsh repression, right? You know, in Russia, you know, in pre-1917 Russia, you know, in China, for instance, like even in Vietnam, like there was these really repressive governments, and in all various cases throughout South America too, that they were able to like fight against in this way, like in almost open war, not maybe clandestine, but warfare. Whereas the U.S., it was like the Communist Party kind of couldn't get around to that point, right? Like there was a secret police that were political police in many instances that were arresting them, but they were never able to like heighten the tensions enough to where they were able to fight back on that kinetic plane. I guess that makes sense. That sort of stuff didn't actually happen until the 1960s, 1970s, and it didn't work.
Well, I guess my sense, and I think I may have made this point earlier, is look, the United States, and your point on exceptionalism, is an extremely rich country. And from 1947 until about 1970, you know, you could be an auto worker and you'd buy a boat.
Yeah.
You know, you would have a little, you know, country cottage on the lake or, you know, a little place down the shore. It was a good life. And, it was the goodies. And I think the material basis for people not gravitating toward a radical solution was really what, you know, kept things in check.
This is the development of the middle class.
Yeah, exactly. A nice middle class life. And that's all gone now.
Well, we have credit cards. And people, I mean, this is...
Yeah, I think David Harvey likes this term of fictitious capital.
Yeah.
I mean, right now there are probably trillions of dollars floating out there ready to get burned up. But, you know, that's another conversation.
So you mentioned the trial of 11 communists down on Center Street, and that's the Smith Act trial, right?
Yeah, and it's intense. There's a whole coming together. So this second Red Scare gets going. Truman, he institutes loyalty oaths. He announces the Truman Doctrine. There's these espionage scares where some of these people come out of the woodwork, like Whittaker Chambers, saying they were spying for the Soviet Union. I mean, the U.S. and the Soviets were allies. People forget this. You know, some of the communists were complicit in passing secrets to the Soviets because they didn't want them to be at a disadvantage. It was kind of Truman himself acknowledged it was only a matter of time before the Soviets got the bomb, just because a lot of the physics was actually in the public record. Point being is a lot of wind was whipped up about, you know, these spy cases, and, you know, people like the Rosenbergs, you know, not the wife, but the husband probably was spying. There's now evidence.
His ass definitely did that shit. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, but did he actually give the Soviets the bomb? I don't think that's...
But I would argue...
He should have, if he didn't.
If he didn't, he should. I agree. But I kind of think... I think he did... Let me... Before anybody gets all pissed off at me, he did it. And he's a hero for having done it. And I think because the U.S., that was part of their case against him, right? It's like he helped them get a nuclear bomb. He probably had some part in it. Who knows? I
think a lot of people did.
Yeah, I think I do. I agree. I think a lot of people did.
I think there's evidence that a lot of people did.
I think Klaus Fuchs was the one who gave out the best technology. But my thing with the Rosenbergs, as far as this book is, like, you know, just like the guy, well, they executed him.
And his wife.
Yeah, and you know, The reason they even brought charges against her, and it just shows you how nasty the Department of Justice was, they're trying to leverage her against him.
Yeah.
Roy Cohn.
Yeah. So it's just ugly stuff. But that's part of the kind of a certain moment in the second Red Scare. But let's go back to the 11. Okay, so you've got these spy scandals going on, getting people in a certain frame of mind, like there's this dangerous conspiracy lurking. Then you have the Hollywood 10 in 1947. They're brought in front of Congress. They're asked to, admit Communist Party membership. The FBI has researched them. They have their cards. You can actually call up the transcript, and they've got the party card numbers. So this is the evidence they were party people. They refused to answer, and rather than taking the fifth, they refused to answer. So they get contempt. And they're sentenced to a year or two in prison each. People like Dalton Trumbo and
Alva Bessie.
Yeah,
I don't know how I got this, but I have a signed Polaroid from him.
Wow, that's.
But I don't know where the fuck it came from.
Probably eBay.
But the thing, it's interesting because so they're, this is like very clever on the part of the powers to be to put these quote unquote intellectuals and eggheads up there because they're less sympathetic than some of the celebrities who had they been challenged and stuff. So that happens, and then we go into 1948, 1949. Paul Robeson, this towering figure, singer, actor, lawyer, athlete.
A true multi-hyphenate.
Yeah, African-American
man. For all
man,
seasons.
Fights for integration into baseball, goes to a conference in Paris, says something along the lines of, let's not have another war. It's not good for anybody.
Yeah.
It gets conflated to black people are not going to fight and defend America. I'm coarsely paraphrasing, but
that is basically what
they turn it
saying,
into a Fox News moment. Robeson is supposed to perform in Peekskill, New York at a summer concert at the end of August. While that's happening, 11 leaders of the Communist Party, their trial for violating the Smith Act gets underway. The violation of the Smith Act gets back to your point about the dissolution of the Comintern. 1944, Earl Browder leads the Communist Party. He's kind of seen the party through its greatest expansion.
Yeah.
Communism is 20th century in Americanism.
Yes.
He envisions after World War II, and you could see this.
Yeah.
The U.S. and the Soviets are allies. We're going to have a whole different deal. I'll shake hands with Vanderbilt if I need to.
He was reading that like Life magazine things about like saying nice things about Stalin during World War II. He's like, see, look, like they like us now.
So he what he does is we're going to get rid of this Communist Party USA name. We'll make it an association.
Yes.
The Communist Party of America. Stalin says, I don't like this.
Jacques Duclos, the leader of the PCF, is like, this guy's a fucking sucker.
Yeah,
he sucks.
So suddenly everybody who supported Earl Browder in the Communist Party was like, we've always hated Browder.
Yeah.
He's a revisionist. Browder is driven out. It was interesting looking and seeing later in life Browder talking to the FBI just to have a sympathetic ear.
Oh, God. And his grandson, and obviously his grandson, weird, one of the guys who went and looted Russia in the 1990s, but also has a lot of weird stuff with him now. But his great-grandson, I found this out while reading your book, because I was looking up for some reason, because his sons were famous mathematicians. Earl Browder's sons, his brothers, or I think his sons were. His grandson was the guy who looted Russia, and then his great-grandson came up with donotpay.com.
What is donotpay.com?
I think it's some shit it's like some shit where you like contest like parking tickets.
Okay. I'm just hearing it in like
that just seems
Pablo,
like a really noble undertaking.
Yeah. I'm like, you know what? I'm like, that's like
do not.
It's
pay.
almost communist.
I know. I'm like, that's fair enough. But sorry, I interrupted.
So Robeson's going to sing in Peekskill.
Yes.
Earl Browder had disbanded the party. Stalin said, knock it off. The party is reconstituted, and that's when they broke the Smith Act.
Yeah.
They created a party with the intent of advocating the overthrow of the United States government. So that's what they're charged with. The trial is like, if people are familiar with the Chicago 8, Chicago 7 trial, with total media event, this is kind of the forebear of that. The lawyers are actually put in prison for contempt. The judge is hostile. They're all convicted. But the trial is going on at the same time as this Peekskill concert is going on. Ben Davis and I think Jack Satchel, 2 Communist Party leaders, go to the concert. So the concert is besieged by a bunch of reactionaries, and with the American Legion at the point. It's supposed to take place at the end of August, and the concert site is ransacked by these vigilantes. The concert's canceled. Robeson's on the train platform. He has to go back to New York. It's rescheduled for September. It comes off. The concert's a success, but then as people are leaving, the reactionaries and community people have set up a gauntlet, and they're just hurling huge, deadly stones at the cars.
The picture you have in the book of that is fucking crazy. Because I knew about the Peekskill riot, but I never. It looks like a staged photo or something. It's like people are really.
It looks like one of the lynching photos.
Yeah, it really does. And so same sort of
Kind
like
of
a cop.
postcards of the hanging.
There's kind of a cop kind of sort of exploding out of his Sam Brown belt, and all these people like really viciously screaming and hurling shit.
But the 2 events take place at the same time: the Peekskill riot and the trial, and also Robert Thompson, one of the guys who's on trial. He's viciously attacked. I think a year earlier, he lives in Sunnyside, Queens, and 2 guys come out of nowhere and try to beat him to death. He's a war veteran, decorated war veteran. He kind of beats him off. He'll later go underground, be put in prison. He'll get attacked again by a Yugoslav fascist. I mean, they really wanted to kill Robert Thompson. This is what these people were up against. I mean, this was, you had to have some courage to be with this stuff. As screwed up as the policies could be, and the draconian hierarchy and the internal politics and all that, which is just maddening. But still, if you were that, you had to be ready to get beaten and go to prison. And, you had to basically, back up your speech and back up your principles.
Yeah, I knew Simon Gerson's daughter. I don't know, like 6 years. I met her like 6 years ago, and she sort of told me about some stuff related to this. Because he was. I don't know if he was one of the 11, but he was one of the people that was picked up during the Smith Act stuff. Or the
Simon
trials.
Gerson was, I believe, he was an assistant to a New York government official, and he kind of got driven out of office.
Yeah, he was like he was like the New York. I think the New York Communist Party is like legislative
you folks
guy.
in New York, you've got like a kind of a sketchy history there,
Yeah,
true.
Yeah, but because Ben Davis was in office, right, when he got arrested.
City councilman.
Yeah, they arrested a sitting city councilman, and then the rest of the city council votes to kick him off the council, and he's replaced by somebody a non-communist.
Yeah, that's democracy for you.
Yeah, and they won't let him pick his own replacement, which is another thing.
When I was in high school, we had this group, the Stoned Rapids People's Party.
Great name.
Back in the day, we wanted the ability to smoke cigarettes on school grounds.
Okay, yeah.
So they
didn't let you?
No, they didn't let us. And I was president of student council based on my party. So I kind of called a meeting, and I got this rule passed. So you know what they did? They kicked me out of school, and they called another meeting.
What?
Yeah. So it's like that's how.
But you know what? You learned a lot.
That's how democracy works.
Wow. So I want to
But I
fast.
quit smoking. But
Well, yeah,
sorry,
that's fair, yeah.
I went Benjamin Gitlow on the smoking stuff. I guess.
The Communist Party. I mean, one of the reasons that they do the Smith Act shit, all this stuff, is they're like, we need to just like arrest the leadership, because they sort of, kind of correctly figure that if we just like basically decapitate the party, it's gonna be running around like a damn chicken without a head.
Ain't pretty.
But also it'll drive, and this is like where you start to see some of the COINTELPRO logic come into play. It'll drive sort of a logic of paranoia within the people who weren't arrested. Because the reality is that there were informers, as you really ably sort of show throughout the book, there was informers from basically day one of the party.
A lot of informers.
A lot of informers.
And high up, too.
Yes. Yeah, I mean,
And
we
low
should,
down, actually. Really all over the place.
at a certain point, I mean, the sort of famous crack about the CPUSA is that like everybody at a meeting is an informer or whatever. This is like in the
Yeah,
1980s.
of course.
But like,
But
it kind of, I think you
Yeah.
say at one point, you're like, it appears to be that 1 in 20 members was an informer by like the 1960s.
Yeah,
70s.
well, just to be fair, their membership had decreased from 20,000
I know.
to 2,000, and
Right.
so who's the hardcore is either the hardcore or the informants. So
I know, but if you're like one of the informers, I guess you're getting paid, right? And so you're like,
But also, I mean, that was an explicit project, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't as if like so many people simply just turned on their own volition.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like worth to go back to that kind of like dialectical relationship, like, because I do, I don't want to be unfair. Like you're saying, like the membership had decreased so much. It was such a different era. And some of that was shaped, I mean, not some of it, a lot of it was shaped by the very attacks that had been going on for decades prior.
Yeah, I would point people to my second book, which is Threat of a First Magnitude, which I don't think got. I would hope people would really use it as the resource it was meant to be, because I actually discovered, I don't know if I discovered, but at least I was able to give attention to a doctrine of the political police, not just in the United States, but overall is the object of the game is to get your informant as high up as possible.
yeah.
And I don't think most left entities, have much sense of this. It was funny, doing this book, I discovered a publication from the 20s where I think it might be a Comintern missive where they're saying, the problem is with this democratic centralism is we got this membership down below that doesn't know what's going on. So if they get the informers up here, we're kind of, they're going to be able to operate in place.
And the Bolsheviks faced this very early on in
Malinovsky.
Yeah, exactly. Like there was Okhrana informants who were like well placed within the Bolsheviks.
A little democracy goes a long way sometimes. Don't go crazy,
You don't listen. Yeah. And democracy is a sort of malleable term, right? But
you need to give people ownership of what's going on. You need to enable people to understand the deal.
Well, you talk a lot in the book about Operation Solo, which is the Childs
which is
brothers.
appalling. Yeah,
It's fucking crazy. But could you explain to us what went down there?
Okay, interesting thing too is just to kind of make this point, the FBI during COINTELPRO is very tuned into anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union. So whenever there's like reports of anti-Semitism, they make sure that it goes out to the Communist Party membership.
Yeah, well, that's something you mentioned here, which I was like, this is crazy. Is there like, every time there was like an article in the New York Times or whatever about like anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union, they would clip the article and then mail it to like Communist Party members' houses. So were people just getting like letters every other day being like, who the fuck is sending me like these clippings?
Well, the FBI was very aware of it. It's like a lot of times Hoover would say, don't send it because they're going to know we've got a list. So we need to figure out an artful way to do this. And I'm sure they screwed up. Morris Childs, my sense is that was probably one issue for him. But Morris Childs was editor of the Daily Worker in the 40s, been a friend of Earl Browder. I mean, this is where the conflict, the dialectic between these internecine internal struggles and then the wider way they operate in the world starts to bear fruit. Earl Browder's thrown out. Morris Childs' protector is gone. He's feeling sick. His wife leaves him. He's out of the party. His wife leaves him because she's in the party. He's not. I mean, there's all this screwed up stuff that goes on. Morris Childs is on a sick bed, and this FBI agent in Chicago goes and basically becomes his buddy. Let's talk.
Yeah.
And it's like when you're isolated and somebody wants to have an intelligent conversation, that's very seductive, in the true sense of the word. They flip Morris Childs and they cultivate him. It's a program called Top Level.
Not a very...
Yeah, not a great one.
Yeah.
But for people who don't believe in conspiracy theories, wake up.
Yeah. No, because they really do. I mean, they go to this guy and they're like, what do you think about working for us?
They
now?
recruit him and they let him be a sleeper, until he essentially, by the time Gus Hall takes control of the party, Morris Childs is effectively number two. Henry Winston, the African-American comrade who was jailed under the Smith Act is, I think, nominally number 2, but Morris Childs has the juice because he is the guy who takes 20-odd trips to the Soviet Union and brings back millions of dollars. And this is what blows me away, is like, this is known. I didn't discover any secret documents, but it's like essentially the FBI was instrumental in funding the Communist Party USA in the 60s through the vehicle of Morris Childs. Read the book, Operation Solo, by this guy, John Barron, who's a Reader's Digest guy. He's a right-wing guy, and he had the cooperation of Childs' FBI handlers, and it's all kind of there. You know, this is not me just making this stuff up. But he's allowed to be in the CPUSA. The FBI could have closed it down at any point. In fact, when it seemed like Morris Childs might get exposed, they deliberately targeted another leader of the party, you know, claiming he was the informant, and he got driven out. There's an academic journal article by Haynes, and I forget the other author, but it's good research. But yeah, that's what Solo is, and Morris Childs stays in place till 1980 when he just retires as an old man to Florida.
Yeah.
You know, never uncovered. And he is, you know, this is like the CPUSA is seen as, you know, a foreign intelligence threat.
Yeah.
You know, an agent of the Soviet Union, not a domestic. I mean, I think he's even Childs informing on the CP's domestic activity is modest because he's mainly an asset to understand what's going on in the Soviet Union, which kind of raises the whole question of, you know, remember when the Soviet Union collapsed and everybody's like, oh, we didn't see that coming.
Yeah,
I mean, I wonder how much they did see coming and how much they didn't.
Well, it's also kind of related to his like job going to the Soviet Union. Like he was the guy that was bringing over millions of dollars. What the fuck were they doing with that money? Like you have an organization of 3,000. Dude, if I had a political party with 3,000 guys and I was getting 10 mil, which by the way is like 1975 $10 million
No
or whatever.
tax.
No, zero. Yeah, straight ruble. I'm like, dude, we're having the sickest cars. You know what I mean? Like we're going to attract people by just like driving around in really nice cars and be like, communism did this for us. Because it's technically true. You're not lying. It is technically true.
No, but it is crazy in the book. I mean, trying to, you know, wrap your head around the fact that the FBI was basically sustaining this party to be this vehicle for this other thing that ends up being, I mean, I don't know how instrumental.
You would have thought that would have been a scandal, right?
But it also reminds me so much of just kind of like inertia a little bit. It's sort of like we've been doing this for so many decades, and the like, you know, all of our work has you know, resulted in basically collapsing this entity or carving it up so much that only we occupy it now. And so we have to kind of sustain it just in both for our own purpose and to like give the organization its own purpose now, because it's all basically, you know, our employees.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's an aspect to that. It's just keeps going on its own energy, but it does end. You know, I mean, it's all developmental. And again, I guess I kind of went to the point where in the 50s things shifted.
Yes.
Like, you know, up to that point there was. I mean, look. The reality is the Communist Party USA never came close to apprehending actual power.
Yes.
But, you know.
It could have, though. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, nobody expected Lenin to take over and topple the Tsar either. You know, it's like, it's easier to read it after it's already
well, it doesn't happen
until
it does.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But yeah, like but I would agree that like with history and like being able to compare them to communist parties in basically every other country in the world, they didn't do amazing in terms of getting power.
Yeah.
But also a totally different government system than you can compare to any other kind of European system, in the sense that there's no proportional representation anywhere. There's no parties really in America, plus the material base, plus like I think what your book really well documents. I mean, you know, obviously the repression in European countries was up there and very different. But because they had almost a kind of like, historical place within a lot of these like parliaments, the repression that you document, I think totally, at least for me, it totally shaded my understanding of kind of like some of the contingencies of the
look at
CPUSA.
Yeah, I'm sorry
and
to
like
interrupt.
what could have, no, just not what could have been, but like that it's hard to really it's hard to understand their limitations without also understanding everything that they kind of like face, which completely decapitated them very, very, very early on.
The legacy of anti-communism in this country is still with us, and it's. I just remember growing up with a Cold War education. I'm 10th grade history. We were being taught about Hegel and dialectics. Exactly, so
That's a cool school.
Well, it wasn't cool. It was exactly.
You couldn't smoke there.
Yeah, you couldn't, and it was exactly to tell us how bad this stuff was. But look at the hue and cry about Mamdani.
Yeah,
the cover of the New York Post, Red Apple, which is the title of
that was a great
book
cover,
by this friend of mine, this Australian academic who wrote a great book about the Red Scare in New York and such. But communist is, it's a word with the power of something like pedophilia.
Yeah.
It's like you are like that. I mean, for most mainstream people in the U.S.
It's interesting too, because like to kind of go back into, I think of one of the things that really stymied the CPUSA was actually the New Deal. Like, all these right wingers gave Roosevelt a lot of shit to put it I guess lightly, about the New Deal, but I think the New Deal really kind of like it worked.
Knocked the wind out.
Knocked the wind out of the
Just
CPUSA.
like I said, it's like we have to go for the soil that's engendering these people.
And he was correct. I mean, from a objective perspective, he was correct. It did go after the soil, but it's interesting. Like now, there still is, because I always look up and like, which of these laws are still in the books, and most of them aren't even nominally on the books, because people always talk about, laws, it's still a law, but like nobody charges anybody over that anymore. Like that's not how it's used anymore. But like I'm always like, if it's still in the books,
but that's a silly thing to say. Not what you're saying. The people who are saying that to you, when like since Obama, they've been reaching back into the books and using laws that haven't been used since the very time that we've been talking about.
And then there's 9/11 where they passed new laws.
Exactly.
Right.
But one of the ones that still is on the book is that if you apply, I don't know if you even apply for a visa or a green card, they ask you if you're a member of a communist party.
Oh, it's a green card. Yeah. You have to say if you're a member of a communist party.
Exactly. And it's like, and I was looking to see like whose members or whose green card applications have been denied from this, like in recent history. I think it's mostly Cubans, but it's like still you're still not technically, and there's allowances. No, not a communist party.
Oh, that's right.
There is one, but that's not the ruling party.
Right.
But there's still like there's still these things that exist on there, and they have these sort of allowances to like where they're like, well, if we think you're all right, you can still come in or whatever. But it's still on the books, and it's still something that's asked on green card forms. And like, that is completely I think that came about in you mentioned, I think before World War II, after World War II, I think they added like, or a member of any other totalitarian parties, which actually did not stop that many people.
I love the idea of being like, I'm the member of a totalitarian party.
Yeah. I'm like, well, what is you're trying to
first
be
of all,
like
that famous movement. Across.
No, they do define it. And they define it as a group that I can't remember. Because I was looking at this the other day. Like they define it as a group or a political party that is like a one-party rule and enacts violence against its opponents. So I'm like, there's not a two-party rule here. Just one is bad, and technically,
who are they talking about?
China, for instance.
Oh,
it's a coalition government. Technically,
Well, so just I don't know, man. I'm trying to think of a kind of how to bring this all home. When I was writing this book,
Dylan quote.
When I was writing this book, I did not think Donald Trump was going to come back in office. There was no intention that, and then he came into office, and they're doing all this craziness with enemy aliens, and The Smith Act is still actually on the book, but it's been neutered in terms of what it actually can do. But it's just interesting how, again, the Joseph Heller, they'll do what they're allowed to do. When I was writing it, though, I kind of wanted the people to understand that, and this is hopefully a question for the future, that we live in a post-Trump world, is like, be careful about your expectations, because the freedom in this country is very tenuous and very relative. Yes, there's nominal freedoms, but they have the ability, 100 which ways to sundown, to dispense with them. And, and it's in concert with, it's not just a dialectic between the FBI and the radicals, but you've got Congress, you've got the news media, who all kind of, for lack of a better word, conspire to create a climate in which things can be tamped down in the status quo. And the status quo is bad. Mm-hmm. People are suffering, and they're suffering needlessly, and something new does need to be brought into being, and I have no idea when and how that happens. But people invariably will be, compelled and arcing toward, not just social justice, but equality. And the authorities are going to do everything they have in their arsenal to keep it in check. And I think actually understanding it in particularity and not being taken in can be helpful. I mean, it's only just one element of a larger struggle. And in that sense, I hope people do read the book and get something from it, aside from just the fascinating, historical stuff and all the little, examples. It's like actually knowing what's actually happening and not just being, whipsawed by these things, can be enormously powerful.
Well, the book is so comprehensive. It's great to see all of this material in one place, which I know was, essentially one of the projects of the book. And it's just excellent. I think our listeners, I almost said our readers, I think our listeners.
Oh, there are little readers.
They're little
aren't
readers who read with their ears, will read it with their eyes and really enjoy it. And we'll link to it in the show notes. It's been so great to have you in person. I just enjoy it so much.
I'm tempted to move back east so I can come and do this again someday.
I would love that. Aaron Leonard joining us with Menace of Our Time, The Long War Against Communism. I had to look up against... when the subtitle always fucks me up. Or what is it called? The sub something? Whatever. Whenever we have a guest and it's a long book title, that's what always fucks me up because I won't remember the entire thing. It's out on Rutgers University Press, and like Liz said, we have a link. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thanks for having me.
All right, I'm Liz.
I'm Brace, and I want to say this.
Oh, no.
I want to say this. Browder, they kind of did do Browder a little dirty because you can't fault a guy for being stupid, right? You can actually, but I'm like, just demote him. You know what I'm saying?
He was already very isolated.
He was very isolated. But I love William Z. Foster. I'm a big Foster head.
You are?
Yeah, I have several of his books. I like William Z. Foster. I look up to him. I think he's great. And he's really one of the few guys who was just, everyone else kind of like, not everyone else, Ruthenberg didn't, but like, and not, to be fair, it was really just Love Stone and then later a little bit Browder. But I'm like, he didn't snitch or nothing. I like William Z. Foster. But my name is Brace Belden.
And I'm producer Young Chomsky.
And this has been TrueAnon. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein.